Welcome back for episode 2 of the special ongoing series of battles that I started called the Capcom Tournament. So, with that said, in match 1 last week, we pinned up two all time classic 2D fighting game powerhouse titles. It was Marvel vs. Capcom 2 went up against, of course, the juggernaut that is in the Evo scene, Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. At the end day, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 won and moves on to the next round. In total, we have 16 games until on again, off again on this tournament, and they were tallied through asking opinions of people's thoughts on best Capcom games, whether it be action oriented, whether it be fighting games, survival horror games, hack and slash, basically all genres are open. And that is both all time classics as well as modern classics. So, with that said, in today we have match 2 of the tournament, and this is a battle of arguably two of the most beloved titles in the Biohazard aka Resident Evil series. We have a battle between two different Resident Evil titles that, in their respective time frames, would end up evolving and definitely bringing a new something to the titles and change many of the aspects that would be normal and traditional in the Resident Evil series from the beginning era of like 95, 96 time frame with the original classic Resident Evil, then continuing and perfecting the gameplay with Resident Evil 2. And to me, the pinnacle, though Resident Evil 2 is my all-time favorite, I consider the pinnacle of that era to be Resident Evil Code Veronica, which is my number 2 favorite Resident Evil game of all time. But with that said, today we are looking at two titles in my top 5 favorite Resident Evil games. We are looking at, first, the title that would definitely evolve the franchise into a bit more of an action-oriented gameplay style and universe building wise. That would continue on with Resident Evil 5, which is arguably more of an action co-op game. It's the best way to describe 5. 6 is better just to be forgotten into the winds. In my personal opinion, is the worst Resident Evil game. But whatever. To me, Resident Evil Classic is all-time horror, but what are other people's opinions? Well, with Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 7 are both individual titles in the series that are beloved to this, definitely arguably, by many critics. In fact, probably one of the biggest critics to a lot of what is considered classic horror today, of like the fixed camera angles and of course the clunky controls. One of the biggest critics of that gameplay, which is my personal favorite thing about old-fashioned survival horror games in the classic Resident Evil games that only unfortunately would end after Veronica, will be the final title in this specific gameplay style. Now, Resident Evil 4 would change. It would still keep some elements of fixed camera angles from time to time. It would give you a little more control over the camera, but still, it still had elements that felt and harken back to the classic Resident Evil games of Gen 1, and I consider Resident Evil 4 the beginnings or whatever of the second generation of Resident Evil games, in my view. And with more of an emphasis based on action, as well as, I guess you could say, more modern control scheme. I will say there are a few things I did like, that it did basically reward exploration by finding items worth a lot of money so you could upgrade your weapons and things. A specific element that is definitely big time brought back in the most recent release, of course, that being Resident Evil 8 Village, which I still really need to get around to playing. But with that said, Resident Evil 7, like Resident Evil 4 did for changing the gameplay overall and going for a bit more of an action oriented style for storytelling and everything, though I will say I hate the quick time events from Resident Evil 4 that would introduce the series for a while, and in general, many games. Thanks a lot, God of War and stuff. Thank you in more recent time. These things like quick time events are dying out, thank goodness. But then we go to Resident Evil 7, which is a game basically that tried to bring back and revive the more horror aspect, the more creepy aspects of the classic games. Now, in my opinion, probably the best example of a Resident Evil game that got things, I think, the perfect balance between creepy atmosphere, everything, but a little bit better gameplay evolution is probably Resident Evil Remake for the Nintendo GameCube. In my opinion, is probably the perfect balance between everything, along with even some stuff I actually liked from Resident Evil Zero. But with that said, Resident Evil 4, of course, would be the first title, and arguably to this day has been released on more platforms than any Resident Evil game ever. Last time I checked, I believe Resident Evil 4 has been ported to about 14 different platforms, which is mind-boggling today, in my opinion. But that's good. It's helped widen and grow the fanbase of RE4. And now you have a new VR version of RE4 that's been released for the Oculus. If you have an Oculus, that is. Then we have Resident Evil 7, which would bring back and harken back to the classic more creepy factor and back to like more of like a big house and stuff. Sadly, it goes off a little bit of the rails the second half of the game, unfortunately, but still, it is great. It definitely is much more creepy once you get, if you've had the chance to play with PSVR, because of luckily very good, excellently executed. Definitely, I think compatibility with the VR, trust me, that takes the experience and the creepiness factor of the game to a whole new level. The jump scares will will scare the crap out of you if you play it in VR. Mark my words, I played it regular and it definitely hinds and makes the enjoyment experience of the game far more superior, in my opinion, though. But with that said, at the end of the day, RE4 would be turn the franchise towards action. RE7 would bring the franchise back to more of its horror roots, though at the same time would also introduce the concept of the game being in first-person view from third-person view for many, many years since the beginning, basically. That is a concept I think works well, especially with the VR experience. I think really helped it. And that thing, I think, also helped with the creepiness factor, though I will always like Resident Evil in third person. Same with, of course, the Silent Hill series. And though I have played some stuff, a bit more of the other, but to me, real true classic survival horror is in third person, for the most part. But I think Resident Evil 7 does first person view just right and perfectly. At the end of the day, for me personally, it's pretty much neck and neck to which game I think is the best. But looking at overall influence as a whole to the genres, how many games were influenced by Resident Evil 4, Silent Hill, and many others would end up going more of a hybrid action horror like Resident Evil 4, but unfortunately 5 and 6 went too far on the action aspect. But with that said, at the end of the day, Resident Evil 4 is by far the most, I would say, critically acclaimed pretty much Resident Evil game in the franchise as a whole. And given how many people, because of so many platforms it's been released for, it has really helped, and the fact there's still versions being released now, this many years later, is kind of mind-boggling to think this game has been around since, well over 15 years now, believe it or not. Which is kind of hard to believe. But at the end of the day, believe the game that will move on to the next round is going to be Resident Evil 4. Though I could definitely lean towards, personally, I think in more recent time, I definitely have come to really love and appreciate Resident Evil 7 for the greatness and the great aspects and details in the storytelling. I love the story, the characters, with that weird, creepy family and everything aspects. I love and introducing a new character in Resident Evil 7, which we kind of end in Resident Evil 8 Village, unfortunately. But with that said, but at the end of the day, Resident Evil 4 moves on to the next round. Resident Evil 7 is dead. So Leon Kennedy will go on to the next round. So Resident Evil 4 joins Marvel vs. Capcom 2 in the next round of the Capcom tournament. With next week, we are going to be looking back at two very interesting games, two all-time classic 2D fighters, to say the least, with great art style and very influential. I think that can be seen even to this day. We are going to be looking at a battle next week between Vampire Savior will be going head to head with Street Fighter 2 Turbo. So, stay tuned for that special battle next week. And with that said, I'll see y'all next time. Stay safe, have a good rest of November, and a safe holiday season. Happy upcoming holidays to everyone out there. See you soon, and yeah, I felt the need to wear this for this video. But hopefully you appreciated also the eerie music I chose today in the background. But anyways, I'll see y'all next time.